But of course they changed the results. There was a man named Dr. William Marcus. And Dr. Marcus was a senior toxicologist in the Department of Water Safety. And he objected to the fact that they had simply doctored the report, because at least in the animal studies it showed there were cancers. And what happened to Dr. Marcus? He was immediately fired. Well, Dr. Marcus mortgaged his home, and he actually took the case to court. He won the case. He got back his job, but nobody in America ever heard about Dr. William Marcus. What had happened to him was like remembrance of yesterday's sunset, simply long since gone. But it was a good lesson, of course, to others that you better not speak up and tell the truth, that they're poisoning the American people. In 1992, Dr. Lyons published an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association pointing out that in communities where they had fluoridated water, you had twice the incidence of hip fractures in postmenopausal women as in areas where they didn't have fluoridated water. In 1994, Dr. Frenny, and for those of you who want to document what I'm saying, we put it all together in this syllabus, and you'll see copies of all of these articles which we've gotten, many of them from the Fluoride Journal, which had given me permission to reprint them. You'll find them here, about how the sperm motility goes down and the testosterone level goes down in men. And you wonder why so many men have sexual dysfunction. Well, fluoride poisons their endocrine system, and they get low testosterone levels, they get obesity and sexual dysfunction, and they've known that. They just don't want the people of this country to know what's really going on. All the studies are there, and you'll read them, and the references to so many other sources. But you see, they have to keep this secret from the American people. Dr. Frenny, in 1994, published his study. He was basically a scientist. He was commissioned to find if there was any relationship between fertility rates and water fluoridation. And as he studied communities all across the country, comparing communities that were fluoridated and not, if you were fluoridated, your fertility level went down. If you weren't fluoridated, your fertility level went up. The higher the fluoride, the lower the fertility. The lower the fertility, the lower the fluoride, the higher the fertility. Dr. Frenny was threatened, told not to publish his article here in the American media. Could things like that really go on in the United States? And Rush Limbaugh and Dan Rather and Tom Brokaw would never tell us. Well, of course, Tom and Dan aren't there anymore, but what about all the others? Why aren't they telling us about these things? In 1994, Dr. Phyllis Mullinex, and you can actually get interviews with some of these people. We have them over there. My 4-tape sits on floor, an interview with Dr. Phyllis Mullinex. Dr. Phyllis Mullinex was an up-and-coming scientist. She was very sought after. She was appointed to one of the most prestigious positions in the country, a researcher at the Forsyth Dental Research Institute affiliated with Harvard University. And she was asked to see what effect fluoridated water had on rats. And so she came up with some sort of a system she called a computer pattern recognition system, or CPRS. And it was computerized. You didn't have to give your opinion. Somehow or other, the computer was actually able to watch the activities of rats. And, of course, there would be rats that were fed fluoridated water and rats that weren't. Female rats that drank fluoridated water had hyperactive offspring. In other words, ADHD, like comparable to what we see in human beings. The attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Male baby rats that drank fluoridated water developed cognitive defects, and female baby rats developed problems later, and they got sort of like couch potatoes. They didn't want to do much of anything. They just sort of sat around. They were all rats just sitting there. Well, with Dr. Mullinex, when she came up with the results, and it was all put out by her computer, she reported this at some meetings, that she was told, don't publish that. And she was threatened, and she was told if she published it, she'd lose her job, and she published it because she was naive. She thought that science was the search for truth, and you never guess what happened. She lost her job. But we still have the opportunity. In fact, we have a video over here, DVD, and you'll actually see an interview with her. That's drinking water safety. It was put together by a good friend, Dr. David Kennedy, and you'll see Dr. Mullinex telling the story. Dr. Hardy Limeback is the chairman of the Department of Preventive Dentistry at the University of Toronto. And Dr. Limeback began to study this issue. Of course, he was totally in favor of water fluoridation until he began doing some study, which most dentists never do. And he realized that they're not putting fluoride into water. they're putting something called hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is a compound of fluoride, lead, arsenic, cadmium, polonium-20, which is a radioactive substance that breaks down to lead. Why would they be putting lead and arsenic into our water? Well, because this comes from the smokestacks of the phosphate industry. They have scrubbers in these smokestacks because this is too toxic to release into the general atmosphere. After all, these people would go to jail if you were to release this substance to the atmosphere. It's too toxic to put into rivers or lakes, or it's so toxic it's very difficult to put it into toxic dumps. It will eat right through metal. So what they do is they put it in special tanks that are lined with rubber, and they truck it to our local communities. They put it on our water system with the idea that if we dilute it, then we just don't have to worry so much. The trouble is that if there's fluoridated water, and they've done the studies, then all the children in those areas have high levels of lead. There is no safe level of lead at all. And then we wonder, so many of our children, minds are not clear. All of this, I mean, we've got the documentation on everything we're telling you. Well, Dr. Hardy Lambach, when he realized what was going on, began to speak out on this. And you'll see on this DVD we have over here, an interview with Dr. Lambach where he tells you essentially what I have. I personally called Dr. Lambach and I said, I'd like you to come on my radio program. He said, oh, I'd like to, but I can't. I've been threatened. I'm not going to risk my family and my children and my job on this issue, but you can read what I've set up on the internet, but I've been threatened. I've been told not to speak out on this again. Well, in 1995, Dr. Kumar wrote an analysis of the original Newberg-Kingston study that had begun 50 years ago. Remember, the study began in 1945, so his article is in 1955. Pardon me, his article is written in 1995, 50 years later. And so we've actually then went to the people. It was published in the New York Dental Association Journal. So I sent them an email, and I said, gee, I'd like your permission to go ahead and, first of all, could you give me a copy of the article? And then secondly, could I publish that in a syllabus I'm putting together for our people who want to learn about fluoride? And I get the letter back, your request to obtain the reproduction right to the article by Dr. Kumar appeared in 1998 in the New York Dental Journal. The authors of the article didn't transfer the copyright to us, and therefore I'm unable to give you permission, etc., etc. In other words, you can't publish it. Well, first we had the article. I just wanted to see what they're going to say. And basically he says that water fluoridation works great. The incidence of dental caries is down in Newberg, but it's also down in Kingston and all other areas. The declining trend in dental caries is apparent in both Newberg and Kingston. Didn't make a bit of difference. But they can't come out and admit that. Then in the year 2000, there was a fellow named Dr. Featherstone. And Dr. Featherstone wrote an article that was published by the Journal of the American Dental Association. And in that article, why he said, doesn't do any good to drink the water. Fluoride acts locally. And exactly as I told you earlier, it is a bactericidal agent. It is the fluoride that kills the bacteria. And in the toothpaste, it works very well. And then if you read the article, he sort of dances all around the issue of what happens, but he says it doesn't do any good to ingest it. So if it doesn't do any good to ingest it, why are we ingesting it? Well, anyway, of course, I wrote to the American Dental Association, asked for permission to reproduce the article, and I got back this very nice letter saying, no, you can't reproduce the article, but since the CDC has put out exactly the same material, I have it here in the syllabus, and you can read, or they tell you, it acts locally, it does not act systemically. And then, of course, the following year, by the CDC and the American Pediatric Association, the ADA got together. And by this time, it was obvious that we had all sorts of dental fluorosis and we had toxicity. Now, for 50 years, they've been recommending that children be given fluoride supplements. Pregnant women were giving, vitamins that contained fluoride in it, which was poisoning the children. And newborn children were being sent home with fluoride drops to protect their teeth. The only trouble was that we were poisoning our children. And by 2001, They finally realized a terrible mistake they'd made, but how can you possibly admit you've made a mistake? So they came out with recommendations. We have them here. If a child is between birth and 6 months of age, no matter how much fluoride there's in the water, you shouldn't give them any fluoride supplements. If they're 6 months to 3 years and there's less than 0.25 milligrams per day, well, that's a very, very small amount of fluoride in the water. You can give them some fluoride supplements, but other than that, not. And basically what they're really telling you is if you have fluoridated water, do not give your children any fluoride supplements, but they've been doing it for 50 years. This is the CDC's publication. Of course, it's all right here. And you have to understand, they've systematically poisoned the American people. Now, what are the sources of fluoride? Well, you get fluoride in just about everything. You get it in your Wheaties, you get it in your Cokes, you get it in your Pepsis, you get it on your lettuce because, of course, they spray our fruits and vegetables to kill the pesticides, and this kills the insects on contact. It also totally disrupts your endocrine system when you when you consume the fluoride. And we've taken simply a list of all the places that you're going to get fluoride here so you can put them down. And then we have included a list of letters from all the countries of Europe asking if they fluoridate their water. None of them fluoridate the water. They do put fluoride into the salt in Switzerland, but that is for fertility control. How do I know that? Well, because we have a book called Man and His Future, published in 1962 by SIBA, and they were talking at that time. The elite, the Julius Huxleys and the Francis Crick and the other people, these elitists, were talking about how they were going to put things in the water to control fertility, and somebody said, well, look, they're putting the fluoride into the salt in Switzerland, maybe we ought to do that. And people said, it really doesn't work very well. You can't tell how much salt people are going to use. But you've got articles here from Brussels and Belgium and Denmark, and there's only places that they fluoridate the water. The poor Irish, about 50% of their areas are fluoridated. I think there are maybe 10 to 12% in Great Britain and no place else. In fact, there's an article here from India saying, why you want to fluoridate your water? We're trying to get fluoride out of your water. China doesn't fluoridate their water. They're trying to get it out of their water. Japan doesn't fluoridate their water. We are part of a great experiment to see how they can control our population by, of course, dumbing down the American people. And, of course, you have to understand that there is so much information. Of course, we've just put this all together here. There's testimony by Dr. Richard Mass that was given. He's an expert on water fluoridation, pointing out, of course, there is no set level of lead, but we're putting it in water. 67% of the water systems of this country. And yet there's not 1 in 1,000 Americans who realize what's really going on. So, as we try to make any sense out of what's going on, it was in the year 2000 that Dr. Hersey, who testified before the United States Senate. Now, Dr. Hersey